The sea off the coast of Acraya had always been a fickle mistress, one day offering bounty, the next barren nets and treacherous currents. Lyra, her hands stained with the ochre clay of the peninsula, understood this rhythm better than most. She felt it in the way the wind shifted, a whisper before the squall, in the precise shade of turquoise the water turned before a storm. Today, however, the sea held a different kind of stillness, an unnatural calm that prickled the hairs on her arms more than any gathering tempest. The usual cries of gulls were muted, the waves lapped at the shingle beach with a sigh rather than a crash. It was the quiet of a held breath, a silence pregnant with unspoken threat. In her small workshop, perched on a rocky outcrop overlooking the restless Aegean, Lyra worked. The rhythmic thud of her palm against the clay was a counterpoint to the sea's eerie quiet. She was shaping a storage jar, its belly wide, its neck graceful. Her movements were economical, born of years spent coaxing form from formlessness. The single, unusually shaped seashell braided into her dark, wavy hair glinted faintly in the diffuse light filtering through the open doorway. A memento, a shard of memory from a day when the sea had shown its true, devastating power. That day, a localized tsunami, a divine whim, as the elders later whispered, had scoured her childhood village from the map, taking her parents with it. It had been Theron, then a younger man but already a respected artisan, who had pulled her half-drowned child from the wreckage. The memory, sharp and cold, was never far. It was the bedrock of her skepticism, the reason she offered the gods the respect of acknowledgement, but little of the fervent piety Theron still clung to. He entered her workshop now, his face a roadmap of wrinkles and kindness, etched with a familiar concern. "The sea is quiet today, Lyra," Theron observed, his gaze sweeping the horizon. He carried a small, freshly carved wooden bird, an offering for the upcoming festival to appease the local spirits. "Too quiet," Lyra grunted, not looking up from her work. "The sea is always something, Theron. Quiet, loud, angry, calm. It's its nature." "Perhaps," he conceded, placing the bird on a rough-hewn shelf, "but this quiet feels different. The fish nets were torn this morning near the silent rocks, not by storm or any creature we know." Lyra paused, her hands still on the clay. The silent rocks, a jagged cluster just off the coast, were considered ill-omened, a place where the currents were particularly treacherous. Sharks, then, or a poorly tied knot? Theron shook his head. The tears were too clean, too deliberate, and the elders say the old shrine to Kimopolea on the headland showed signs of disturbance. Small stones overturned, the wind chimes tangled, though there was no wind last night. Kimopolea, a minor nymph of violent sea storms, a daughter of Poseidon, some said, though her worship in Acraya was all but forgotten, her shrine neglected. Lyra's workshop stood not far from its crumbling stones. She felt a familiar irritation. The gods are always disturbed about something, Theron. A forgotten sacrifice, a slight they imagined. It's how they remind us they exist. Her cynicism was a shield, one she'd carefully constructed. "Respect, Lyra. They provide, and they can take away." His voice was gentle but firm. He had lost his own wife in the great wave. His faith, unlike hers, had deepened, becoming a comfort. "They took," Lyra said, her voice flat, the memory of her parents a raw wound. "And what they provide, we toil for." She resumed her work, the conversation, like many before it, ending in an uneasy truce. Later, as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and fiery orange, Callisto, the young acolyte from Kimopolea's dilapidated shrine, sought Lyra out. Callisto was a wisp of a girl, barely a woman, with eyes that seemed to look past what was there into some other realm. She was often mocked by the village children, tolerated by the adults as harmless, if a little touched by the gods. "Lyra," Callisto began, her voice breathy, twisting a strand of her pale hair, "the stones at the shrine, they spoke to me today." Lyra suppressed a sigh. "Stones don't speak, Callisto." "No, not with words," Callisto insisted, her wide sea-green eyes earnest. "With feelings, a coldness, a hunger. The deep is stirring, it wants something." "The deep always wants something," Lyra replied, wiping clay from her hands. "Usually a fat goat or a jug of our best wine." But Callisto shook her head, a frown creasing her smooth brow. "No, not like that, something more. Something only a crier can give." Her gaze drifted towards the sea, now a dark, brooding expanse under the fading light. "It is listening." Despite her skepticism, a sliver of unease worked its way into Lyra's heart. The sea's unnatural calm, the torn nets, Theron's worry, and now Callisto's cryptic pronouncements. It was a tapestry of ill omens, too cohesive to ignore entirely. The memory of the tsunami, the raw, untamed power of the sea, was a visceral reminder that the gods, whether just or cruel, were undeniably real. And when they stirred, mortals usually paid the price. Acraya, rebuilt from ruins, was a testament to survival, but it was a fragile existence, easily shattered. The unsettling quiet persisted for 2 more days, fraying the nerves of Acraya's inhabitants. Fishermen returned with empty nets, their usual haunts strangely devoid of life. The air itself felt heavy, charged with an unspoken anticipation. Theron organized extra offerings at the main village shrine, a more substantial structure dedicated to a generic protector spirit of the coast. Lyra watched, her hands busy with her craft, her mind a whirl of pragmatic concerns and a reluctant, gnawing anxiety. She found herself glancing more frequently at the sea, at the crumbling stones of Kimopolea's shrine, almost expecting something to manifest from the oppressive stillness. The manifestation, when it came, was not subtle. It began as the village gathered in the small agora for the evening meal, the scent of grilled fish and herbs usually a comfort, now tinged with the salt of their collective worry. A sudden wind, cold and sharp as obsidian, whipped through the square, extinguishing cooking fires and sending pottery clattering. It came from the sea, carrying the scent of brine and something else, something ancient and decayed. The sky, moments before clear, darkened with an unnatural speed. Clouds, the colour of a deep bruise, boiled over the horizon. Then, from the direction of Kimopolea's shrine, a sound arose, a low, guttural moan that seemed to emanate from the very stones, a sound that vibrated in the chest and chilled the blood. Callisto, who had been standing near the edge of the agora, her face pale and drawn, suddenly cried out, her body stiffening. Her eyes rolled back, showing only the whites. She fell to her knees, her hands clawing at the earth as if to anchor herself against an unseen force. Villagers rushed towards her, Theron at the forefront. Lyra, her heart pounding, followed, pushing through the frightened crowd. As they reached Callisto, her voice, no longer her own, ripped through the unnatural silence. It was deeper, harsher, resonant with the power of the crashing waves and the cold of the ocean depths. "Acraya!" the voice boomed, seeming to come from Callisto, yet echoing from the sea itself. "You have built your fragile homes on my shores, drawn sustenance from my waters, yet you offer me crumbs and forgetfulness. I am Brixos, guardian of these currents, keeper of the silent rocks, he whose patience is worn thin." Fear, stark and palpable, rippled through the assembled villagers. Names of forgotten sea daemons were whispered, tales of sailors dragged to watery graves. Lyra felt a cold dread grip her. This was no mere restless spirit. This was a direct claim, a divine fury unleashed. The voice from Callisto continued, each word a hammer blow. "Your mewling offerings are an insult. Your existence here, a gnat's buzzing in my ear. You will learn respect. You will bring me a tribute worthy of the deep's majesty. Something unique, unseen by sun or moon, crafted from the heart of your fear and the marrow of your skill. Fail me, and Acraya will feel my true embrace. The waves will reclaim what is mine." With a final shuddering gasp, Callisto collapsed, limp as a discarded doll. The wind died as suddenly as it had risen. The dark clouds remained, a heavy shroud over the terrified village, Brixos. The name echoed in Lyra's mind. A local deity, perhaps, one whose worship had faded, now reasserting his power with terrifying force. The demand was clear, yet terrifyingly vague, unique, unseen, crafted from fear and skill. What could that possibly mean? Theron was the first to speak, his voice trembling but firm as he knelt beside the unconscious Callisto. "The god has spoken. We must appease him." Panic erupted. Some villagers cried out for immediate, extravagant sacrifices, their best livestock, their dwindling stores of wine and oil. Others spoke of abandoning Acraya, fleeing inland before Brixos's wrath consumed them all. Lyra watched them, her mind racing. Blind sacrifice felt like folly, a shot in the dark against a deity whose desires were unknown. Fleeing felt like surrender, a betrayal of the resilience that had allowed Acraya to rise from the ashes of the last disaster. And what tribute is worthy of the deep's majesty? Lyra asked, her voice cutting through the fearful chatter. He gave us no specifics. How do we know what will satisfy him and not enrage him further? An elder, Demetrios, his face ashen, turned on her. Do you question the god girl? Your skepticism has always bordered on impiety. Perhaps it is your presence here that has drawn his ire. A murmur of agreement rippled through some of the crowd. Fear needed a focus, and Lyra, with her quiet defiance of tradition, was an easy target. Theron rose, placing a protective hand on Lyra's shoulder. Enough, Demetrios. Fear speaks through you. Lyra asks a valid question. A wrong offering could be worse than none. We need wisdom, not just haste. He looked at Lyra, his eyes filled with a mixture of apprehension and a grudging respect for her pragmatism. But we must do something. His threat is not idle. Lyra met his gaze, the image of the great wave, the screams of her parents, flashing in her mind. She knew the sea's capacity for destruction. This Brixos, whoever he was, held their fragile existence in his unseen hand. Survival, as always, would depend not on piety alone, but on understanding the nature of the beast. And this beast, it seemed, had very particular and very dangerous tastes. The demand was a riddle, and the price of a wrong answer was annihilation. In the days that followed Brixos's chilling pronouncement, a pall of fear settled over a crier. The unnatural gloom persisted, the sun a pale disk behind a perpetual grey haze. The sea remained turbulent, its waves crashing against the shore with a relentless, angry rhythm. Fishing was impossible. The few brave souls who ventured out returned with empty, shredded nets and tales of shadowy forms beneath the waves and currents that pulled their small boats with malevolent intent. Fishing was impossible. The few brave souls who ventured out returned with empty, shredded nets and tales of shadowy forms beneath the waves and currents that pulled their small boats with malevolent. The village's meagre stores began to dwindle. Theron, true to his word, organized a series of offerings at the main shrine. A prize goat, its throat slit, its blood seeping into the parched earth, amphorae of their finest, hoarded wine poured onto the altar stones, prayers chanted until voices grew hoarse. Lyra observed these rituals with a heavy heart. They felt like gestures of desperation, offerings made in blindness. Brixos had demanded something unique, unseen, and a slaughtered goat, however fat, was hardly that. Each failed offering seemed to make the air heavier, the sea more menacing. Lyra retreated to her workshop, but not to her usual craft. The demand, crafted from the heart of your fear and the marrow of your skill, echoed in her mind. It was a taunt, a challenge. Fear she had in abundance, a cold, familiar companion. Skill she also possessed. But how to weave them into something that would appease an unknown, unseen god? She began her own investigation. She questioned Theron and the other elders, poring over fragmented local lore. Brixos was a name barely remembered, a minor sea spirit, perhaps a forgotten child of a greater power, overshadowed by the grander deities of the Olympian pantheon. There were whispers of him being tied to the treacherous currents around the silent rocks, a guardian of hidden coves and sea caves along the peninsula, a deity of sudden squalls and the treasures lost in shipwrecks. He hoards what the sea claims, one old woman, her mind half gone, had cackled, and covets what he cannot possess. The information was frustratingly scarce. Lyra felt like she was trying to sculpt smoke. The pressure from the village mounted. With each passing day, the whispers against her grew louder. Her modern ways have angered him, some said. She scoffs at tradition. Demetrios, the elder who had first accused her, openly advocated for her to be offered as a sacrifice herself, a desperate, barbaric thought that nevertheless found fertile ground in the village's terror. Theron staunchly defended her, but even his influence was waning as hunger and fear gnawed at a crier's spirit. Desperate, Lyra sought out Callisto. The young acolyte had recovered from her trance but remained fragile, her eyes haunted. She spent most of her time at Kimopalea's dilapidated shrine, tending to its crumbling altar, lighting small sputtering lamps fueled by precious oil. Callisto, Lyra began, finding the girl tracing patterns in the dust before the altar. Brixos spoke through you. Did you see him? Did he show you anything more? Callisto looked up, her gaze unfocused for a moment before settling on Lyra. I saw darkness, she whispered, and a great cold. And eyes, like polished obsidian, reflecting everything, but showing nothing. He is empty, Lyra, and he wants to be filled. Filled with what? Lyra pressed. Goats, wine, our fear? Callisto shook her head slowly. No, not those. He showed me flashes, a gleam in the dark, something lost, something broken yet beautiful. He desires what is lost to the salt, she murmured, her voice taking on the faint, echoing quality it had during the trance. Reflection shatters pride. The earth's fire sleeps beneath his waves. The words were riddles, infuriatingly opaque, yet Lyra clung to them. Reflection shatters pride. Could Brixos be vain? The earth's fire sleeps beneath his waves. What could that mean? Volcanic rock? Something hidden deep? Lyra spent hours at the shrine, not in prayer, but in observation. The structure was ancient, far older than Acria's current incarnation. Most of its carvings were eroded by centuries of salt wind and rain. But in one sheltered corner, half hidden by ivy, she found it, a faded, chipped relief carving. It depicted a sinuous, almost serpentine sea creature, unlike any known fish or monster, offering a glowing object to a shadowy, throned figure whose features were obliterated. The glowing object was intricately patterned, unlike any treasure Lyra had ever seen. Was this Brixos, or some predecessor? And what was that offering? The earth's fire, Lyra muttered, her fingers tracing the faint outline of the glowing object. Her gaze fell upon the dark, volcanic rock that formed the base of the shrine itself and the cliffs beyond. And then a memory, a snippet of Theron's teachings from her apprenticeship. Some clays, Lyra, hold the memory of fire within them. From the deep earth, kissed by Poseidon's heat. They glow in the darkness, a secret light. Phosphorescent clay. He had spoken of it as a legend, a material found only in the most dangerous hidden places. Could this be it? An offering crafted from such a legendary clay, something that literally glowed, unseen by sun or moon until revealed. Something that reflected what? Brixos did not allow them much time for contemplation. A new affliction descended upon Acria. A strange, brackish mildew began to spoil their stored grain, the little they had left. The precious water in their cisterns took on a faint, salty taste. These were not overt acts of destruction, but insidious, demoralizing attacks, designed to break their will. Lyra knew she had to act. The sea caves. The legend said the phosphorescent clay could sometimes be found there, in veins running through the volcanic rock, accessible only at the lowest tides, and fraught with peril. The silent rocks guarded the entrance to the largest of these cave systems, Brixos's domain. The decision to venture into the sea caves was not made lightly. Lyra knew the risks. The tides were treacherous, the footing unsure, and the caves themselves were a labyrinth of narrow passages and submerged chambers. And then there was Brixos. To enter his sanctum, the very heart of his dominion, felt like walking into the maw of a waiting beast. She tried to enlist help, but the fear in Acria was now a palpable entity. Most villagers recoiled at the mere mention of the silent rocks. Even Theron, his face etched with worry, advised against it. "It is madness, Lyra. You are an artisan, not a hero destined for such trials. Let us find another way, a greater sacrifice." "There are no greater sacrifices left, Theron, that won't cripple us entirely," Lyra argued, her voice tight with a desperate resolve. "And Brixos does not want what we think he wants. He wants something unique. This clay, if it exists, it is our only chance." In the end, only one person offered, not help, but a hesitant companionship. Young Nikos, a fisherman's son, barely old enough to shave, his eyes still wide with the bravado of youth not yet fully acquainted with true terror, approached her as she prepared a small coracle and a satchel of tools. I know the currents around the silent rocks, Kyria Lyra," he stammered, "better than most. My father taught me. I can guide you to the cave mouths." Lyra looked at him, seeing both the fear and the desperate hope in his young face. Acria was his home too. She nodded, a silent gratitude passing between them. "Just to the entrance, Nikos. The rest I must do alone." They set out under the perpetually grey sky, the sea an unnerving slate. Nikos skillfully navigated the coracle through the churning waters near the silent rocks, his youthful confidence belying the tension in his shoulders. The rocks themselves loomed like jagged teeth, black and slick with kelp, the waves crashing against them with a hungry roar. He brought them to a narrow opening, barely visible at the base of the cliffs, a dark slit from which a cold, damp air emanated. "This is the largest entrance," Nikos said, his voice hushed. "The old tales say it runs deep. Be careful, Kyria. Brixos, he feels close here." Lyra nodded, securing a flickering oil lamp to her belt. Wait for me until the tide begins to turn, no longer. If I am not back, seek your own safety." She took a deep breath, the scent of brine and decay filling her lungs, and slipped into the darkness. The cave was a disorienting maze. The lamp cast dancing shadows on the wet, glistening walls. The only sounds were the drip of water, the distant boom of waves, and her own ragged breathing. The air was thick, heavy, and carried an unnerving chill. She pressed on, her artisan's eye scanning the rock faces, searching for any sign of the legendary clay. Callisto's words echoed in her mind. A gleam in the dark, the earth's fire sleeps beneath his waves. Hours passed, or so it seemed in the timeless dark. Her lamp began to gutter. Despair started to creep in. Perhaps the clay was just a myth. Perhaps she was chasing a fool's hope. She was about to turn back when she saw it, a faint, almost imperceptible luminescence in a narrow crevice, high up on one wall. It was a pale, ethereal glow, like captured moonlight. Her heart leaped. With renewed energy, she scrambled up the slippery rocks, her fingers searching for purchase. The crevice was tight, but she managed to reach in, her hand closing around something soft and cool. She pulled it out. In the dim lamplight, it was just a lump of greyish clay, but when she shielded the lamp, the clay itself emitted a soft, milky radiance. Phosphorescent clay. It was real. She worked quickly, scraping out as much as she could, her satchel growing heavy. The distant sound of the waves seemed to be growing louder, closer. The tide was turning. She had to get out. As she scrambled back down, a sudden, intense cold filled the chamber. The flame of her lamp flickered violently, then extinguished, plunging her into absolute darkness, save for the faint glow from the clay in her satchel. A whisper, like the hiss of receding water, slithered through the blackness, seeming to come from all around her. "Curiosity, or theft, little mortal," Brixos's voice. It was not booming as it had been through Callisto, but soft, sibilant, infinitely more menacing in the confined space. "You seek my secrets in the dark?" Lyra froze, her blood running cold. She could feel an immense unseen presence, a pressure in the air that made it hard to breathe. "I seek only to save my village, Lord Brixos," she managed, her voice surprisingly steady despite the terror that clawed at her. A dry, rustling laugh echoed around her. "Save or provoke? The treasures of the deep are not for mortal hands." "This is not treasure," Lyra said, her mind racing. "It is earth. A gift from the deep earth, perhaps, but earth nonetheless, to be shaped, to be offered. Shaped into what, I wonder?" The voice was closer now, a chilling breath on the back of her neck. "Another trinket to insult my majesty." Lyra clutched the satchel of glowing clay. This was a test. She could not show fear, not entirely. "Something unique," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "As you commanded, something born of skill and, yes, of fear. Something that reflects." She hesitated, then plunged ahead, remembering Callisto's words. "Something that reflects true majesty." There was a long silence, broken only by the relentless drip of water. The oppressive presence seemed to intensify, then almost imperceptibly recede. The intense cold lessened slightly. Lyra didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. After what felt like an eternity, she heard the distant sound of Nikos calling her name, his voice strained with anxiety. The tide was coming in fast. Clutching the precious clay, Lyra stumbled out of the sea cave, blinking against the grey daylight, just as the first waves began to lap at the entrance. Nikos, his face pale with relief, helped her into the coracle. Neither spoke on the journey back to Acraia, the unspoken presence of Brixos a heavy weight between them. Back in the relative safety of her workshop, Lyra felt a profound exhaustion, but also a flicker of something else, a defiant spark of hope. She had faced Brixos in his own domain and survived. She had the material. Now the true test of her skill began. The days that followed were a blur of intense concentration. Lyra worked with a feverish energy, the glowing clay cool and pliant beneath her skilled hands. The villagers, seeing her return and the strange, faintly luminous substance she had brought, watched her with a mixture of awe, suspicion, and desperate hope. Theron brought her food and water, his earlier doubts replaced by a quiet, watchful support. Callisto visited often, sitting silently in a corner of the workshop, her presence strangely calming. Sometimes she would murmur fragments of old sea chants, or describe fleeting images that came to her, of swirling currents, hidden pearls, and the cold, lonely pride of an ancient power. Lyra did not try to sculpt a fearsome monster, nor a fawning image of a god. Instead, her vision was more abstract, more subtle. She was crafting a series of large, curved tiles. Each tile, when fired, would retain its ethereal glow. When assembled, they would form not a single image, but a dynamic, swirling pattern reminiscent of the sea itself, its power, its beauty, its treacherous depths. But there was more to it. She incorporated shards of polished obsidian into the clay before firing, positioned so that they would catch and reflect any ambient light or the glow of the clay itself in myriad unpredictable ways. Reflection shatters pride, Callisto had said. Lyra hoped Brixos's vanity would be intrigued, perhaps even disarmed, by an offering that mirrored back not a clear image, but an ever-changing, captivating play of light and shadow, a mystery as profound as the sea he ruled. The earth's fire, she understood now, was not just the volcanic heat that formed the clay, but the creative fire within her, the artist's spirit, and the fear. That was imbued in every careful touch, every desperate hope that this would be enough. As Lyra worked, Brixos did not remain idle. The insidious afflictions on the village worsened. The brackish taste in the water became stronger. A persistent, unnatural fog, thick and chilling, rolled in from the sea, blanketing Acraia in a grey, disorienting shroud. It clung to everything, making the familiar landscape alien and menacing. The sun became a distant memory. Travel between houses was treacherous. The villagers' spirits plummeted. Despair was a contagion, spreading faster than any mildew. The deadline Brixos had implicitly set, the next new moon, now only days away, loomed large. Demetrios and his faction grew bolder, their accusations against Lyra more venomous. She plays with forces she does not understand. Her strange creation will be our doom. There were calls to destroy Lyra's work, to offer her to the sea as a final desperate propitiation. It was Theron who stood against them. Have you forgotten what true divine wrath looks like? He thundered at a village gathering, his voice cracking with emotion as he gestured towards the sea that had once devastated them. Lyra risks her life, her skill, her very spirit, to find a way where our blind offerings have failed. She seeks to understand the god, not just fear him. Will you now destroy our only hope because it does not conform to your fear-addled traditions? His words, born of a deep well of sorrow and a newfound respect for Lyra's courage, shamed many into silence. Finally, the tiles were ready. Fired in Lyra's small kiln, fueled by carefully hoarded wood, they emerged radiating a soft internal light, the obsidian shards gleaming like dark stars within them. Assembled, they created a mesmerizing, shifting mosaic of light and form. It was beautiful, unsettling, and utterly unique. The new moon was a sliver of black against a blacker sky. The fog was so thick, Lyra could barely see her own hands. The air was heavy with the oppressive weight of Brixos's anticipation. It was time. I will go with you, Theron said, his voice resolute. He carried a small, ancient bronze censer, from which wisps of fragrant smoke, an offering of sacred herbs, curled into the fog. A traditional blessing, at least, to shield you. Callisto also appeared, her face luminous in the gloom. She pressed a small, perfectly spiraled seashell into Lyra's hand, not the one Lyra wore, but another, cool and smooth. The sea listens to its own, she whispered. May it hear the truth in your offering. Together, the unlikely trio made their way towards the promontory. Brixos had indicated in Callisto's visions, a jagged finger of rock thrusting out into the turbulent, fog-shrouded sea, a place notorious for sudden, violent waves. The path was treacherous, slick with mist and unseen obstacles. The roar of the unseen ocean was deafening. Reaching the promontory, they were met by a scene of chaotic power. Though the fog obscured much, the air itself thrummed with an unseen energy. Waves, far larger than any natural swell, crashed against the base of the rock, sending plumes of icy spray high into the air, drenching them instantly. The wind howled like a tormented spirit, threatening to tear them from their precarious footing. This was Brixos's chosen stage. Lyra, her heart a wild drum against her ribs, began to carefully unpack the glowing tiles. Theron stood beside her, chanting a low, ancient prayer, the smoke from his censer whipping away instantly in the gale. Callisto, a little behind them, her eyes closed, seemed to be in a light trance, her lips moving silently. As Lyra laid the first tile upon the wet, uneven rock, a voice, vast and resonant as the ocean itself, boomed around them, seeming to come from the wind, the waves, the very fog. So the little mortal artisan returns. With pottery? There was an edge of divine amusement and immense condescending power in the tone. Lyra ignored the taunt, her focus absolute. She carefully placed the next tile, then the next, the inherent luminescence of the clay casting a small, defiant circle of light in the overwhelming gloom. The obsidian shards within them caught the faint, diffuse light of the fog, creating tiny, shifting reflections. "You think these baubles will appease me?" Brixos's voice was laced with a growing impatience. The wind intensified, threatening to rip the tiles from her grasp. A colossal wave smashed against the promontory, water surging around their ankles, cold as death. Lyra flinched but held her ground. She continued her work, her hands moving with precision despite the tremor that ran through her. She was not merely placing tiles. She was performing a ritual of her own making, an act of creation in the face of destruction. This was her answer to his power. As the final tile clicked into place, completing the swirling, abstract mosaic, Lyra stepped back. The assembled piece pulsed with a soft internal light, a miniature galaxy of shifting patterns and dark reflective points. It was unlike anything the gods, in their eons of receiving tribute, could have ever seen. It was not an image of Brixos, nor of any fawning creature. It was an echo of the sea itself, but filtered through mortal artistry, imbued with mortal understanding and defiance. She held up the seashell Callisto had given her. "Lord Brixos," she called out, her voice surprisingly strong against the storm. "You demanded a tribute unique, unseen, crafted from fear and skill. This is a crier's offering. It is not gold nor blood, but it is born of the deep earth you claim, fired with the spirit of survival. It holds no single image, for your majesty, like the sea, cannot be contained in one form. It reflects light as you reflect the world around you. It is a mystery offered to a mystery." For a long moment, the only sound was the raging storm. The oppressive divine presence seemed to intensify, pressing down on them, making it hard to breathe. Lyra braced herself, expecting annihilation. Theron had stopped his chant, his hand gripping Lyra's arm. Callisto swayed, her eyes still closed. Then something shifted. The wind, though still powerful, lost some of its furious edge. The colossal waves seemed to lessen in their intensity. The vortex of Brixos's unseen presence felt different, less overtly hostile, more curious. A new voice, or rather the same voice but with a different inflection, less booming, more contemplative, closer to the sibilant whisper Lyra had heard in the cave, spoke directly into her mind, bypassing the storm. "It shines from within, and it shows me nothing and everything." There was a note of surprise, perhaps even a grudging interest. "You understand reflection, mortal, a rare quality." Lyra dared not speak, her gaze fixed on the glowing tribute. "The usual offerings are so predictable," the mental voice continued. "Fawning, fearful. This has an insolence to its beauty. It does not bow, it considers." Another pause. "You have given me something to look at, little artisan, something beyond the endless shifting of my own waters." Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the unnatural fog began to thin. Patches of the night sky, star-dusted and remote, became visible. The wind softened further, the waves receding to a more natural, if still powerful, rhythm. The oppressive weight in the air lessened dramatically. Brixos did not speak his approval in words of acceptance. There was no grand pronouncement of forgiveness, but his immediate, suffocating wrath had clearly abated. The offering, in its unique way, had intrigued him, perhaps even flattered his divine ego by acknowledging his complexity rather than just his power. As the first pale light of dawn began to touch the eastern horizon, painting the retreating storm clouds with soft greys and pinks, the promontory was quiet, save for the now rhythmic crash of waves. The glowing tiles still pulsed with their soft light, a beacon of defiant artistry against the vastness of the sea. Brixos was gone, or at least his active menace had withdrawn. Theron let out a shuddering breath, his grip on Lyra's arm relaxing. He accepted it?" Lyra nodded, a wave of exhaustion washing over her so profound she nearly buckled. "I think so, Theron. I think he was bored." Callisto opened her eyes, a faint, knowing smile on her lips. "The deep always seeks novelty," she said softly. "You gave it a new reflection." The return to a crier was slow, each step an effort for Lyra. The tension of the previous weeks, culminating in the confrontation on the promontory, had taken its toll. But as they descended from the cliffs, they saw it. The unnatural fog had entirely lifted. The familiar shapes of their village houses were visible, bathed in the gentle light of a new morning. The sea, while still lively, had lost its malevolent churn. The air was clean, crisp, smelling of salt and damp earth, not decay and fear. A cry went up as they were spotted. Villagers, their faces drawn and weary from nights of terror, rushed out to meet them. Seeing Lyra, Theron, and Callisto alive and witnessing the clear sky, a wave of incredulous relief swept through them. Nikos was among the first to reach them, his youthful face alight. "Kyria Lyra! The sea! It's calm. The sickness in the grain. It's lessened overnight." The news spread like wildfire. Lyra's strange tribute, her solitary defiance, had worked. When Theron recounted, his voice filled with awe, what had transpired on the promontory, the storm, Brixos's voice, the glowing offering, the villagers looked at Lyra with a new respect. It was not the adulation offered to a conquering hero, but something deeper. An acknowledgement of a courage and an intellect that had saved them where brute strength or blind piety would have failed. Demetrios and his faction were notably silent, their fear replaced by a sheepish, grudging admiration. Lyra did not seek praise. She was too tired, too aware of the thin thread by which their survival hung. Brixos was not defeated, he was merely diverted, appeased for now. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her despite the morning sun, that such a being's favour was as fickle as the tides. In the days that followed, Acraia slowly returned to a semblance of normality. Fishermen ventured out and returned with modest but welcome catches. The mildew on the grain stopped spreading. The water in the cisterns cleared. The heavy shroud of fear lifted, replaced by a cautious optimism. Lyra's workshop became a place of quiet pilgrimage. Villagers would stop by, not always to commission work, but simply to look at the place where the glowing tiles had been crafted, to speak a few words with the woman who had faced the sea's anger and returned. Her relationship with Theron deepened into a partnership of mutual respect. He no longer preached blind faith to her, and she, in turn, acknowledged the wisdom in some traditions, the comfort they could offer. Callisto became a true friend, her cryptic pronouncements now shared with Lyra, not as burdens, but as pieces of a puzzle they might decipher together. The neglected shrine to Kimapolea, and by extension Brixos, its current more assertive inhabitant, began to receive small, thoughtful offerings. A uniquely shaped shell, a smooth piece of driftwood, a small clay effigy of a sea creature, offerings of acknowledgement rather than fearful appeasement. Lyra herself was changed. The raw edge of her cynicism had softened, not into belief, but into a profound understanding of the world's intricate, often perilous balance. The gods were real, their power undeniable, but mortals were not entirely helpless. They possessed their own strengths, ingenuity, artistry, courage, the ability to understand, to adapt, even to find beauty in the face of terror. Her art, too, changed. It was still functional, still rooted in the needs of her community, but it now carried a deeper resonance, a subtle awareness of the unseen forces that shaped their lives. The seashell in her hair no longer felt just like a memento of loss, but also a symbol of the sea's enduring presence, its capacity for both destruction and a strange, terrible beauty. One evening, weeks later, Lyra stood on the same promontory where she had faced Brixos. The sea was calm, reflecting the starlit sky. The glowing tiles were gone, reclaimed by the waves or taken by the god himself. She felt no fear, only a watchful quiet. She had learned that heroism wasn't always about grand battles or divine parentage. Sometimes it was about understanding the nature of your adversary, crafting a response with the best of your skill and spirit, and standing firm in the face of overwhelming power. Sometimes it was simply about finding the right reflection to offer the darkness. She picked up a smooth grey stone, water-worn and ancient. For a moment she considered tossing it into the waves, a small personal offering. Instead she slipped it into her pouch. It was a piece of the earth, solid and real. Like her, like Acraia, it endured, and in that endurance against the vast, capricious power of the cosmos lay a quiet, resilient kind of victory. The world was still a dangerous place, the gods still unpredictable, but Acraia had found its footing once more, and Lyra, its artisan, knew that the human spirit, like the clay she shaped, could be surprisingly strong, capable of holding its form even under immense pressure. Hope, she realized, wasn't just a word whispered at the bottom of a cursed jar. It was a choice, a craft, something to be painstakingly built day by day in the very heart of fear. The peace that settled over a crier was not one of complacency, but of watchful respect. Brixos, true to his nature as a minor territorial deity, did not trouble them further with grand demands. The sea still had its moods. Sudden squalls would blow in, fishing would be lean for days, but these felt like the natural caprices of the Aegean, not the targeted malice of an angered god. Lyra's tribute, it seemed, had struck a chord, establishing a fragile, unspoken accord. Lyra found her role in the village subtly transformed. She was still the artisan, her hands shaping clay into vessels for daily life, but she was also sought out for her quiet counsel. When strange omens appeared, or when a difficult decision faced the village elders, Theron would often say, "Let us ask Lyra. She has looked into the deep and seen what others have not." Her skepticism hadn't vanished, but it was now tempered with a wisdom that acknowledged the power of the unseen. She taught the younger villagers not to fear the sea, but to understand its patterns, its warnings, its hidden gifts, much like she understood the properties of her clay. Callisto, too, found her place. The villagers no longer saw her as merely touched, but as a conduit, a listener to the whispers of the world. Her fragmented prophecies were heeded, pieced together with Lyra's pragmatic insights to navigate the small uncertainties of their lives. The shrine to Kimapalia, though still modest, was tended with care, its offerings small but consistent, a testament to a crier's acceptance of the delicate balance they now maintained. They did not seek to control Brixos, but to coexist alongside his power. One blustery autumn afternoon, a trading ship, blown off course by an early gale, sought shelter in a crier's small harbour. This was a rare event. Their peninsula was not on any major trade route. The captain, a weathered man named Iones, was full of tales from distant ports, of grand cities and the deeds of mighty heroes favoured by Zeus or Athena. He spoke of the lingering conflicts after the great Trojan War, of kings returning to treachery and of demigods still roaming the land, their adventures shaping the world. The villagers listened, captivated. These were stories from a larger, more dramatic world than their own quiet existence. Lyra listened too, a familiar ache in her heart. The world of epic heroes and grand divine interventions felt impossibly distant from a crier's daily struggles. Their victory over Brixos had been a quiet, internal affair, a battle of wits and artistry, not of bronze swords and thunderbolts. Ionas, noticing Lyra's intricate pottery, sought her out. "Your craftsmanship is fine, woman," he said, examining a particularly well-formed amphora. "As good as any I've seen in Corinth or even Athens, but your designs, they are different." He pointed to the subtle, wave-like patterns she now often incorporated, the way she used dark slips to suggest depth, or sometimes, if the clay allowed, managed to coax a faint luminescence from it. "They speak of the sea, not just as a surface, but as a presence." Lyra merely smiled. "The sea is our constant companion here, Captain. It shapes us as I shape the clay." Before he departed, Ionis made Lyra an offer. "Come with us. Your skill would fetch a high price in the cities. You could have a grand workshop, apprentices, fame even." The offer was tempting. A life beyond a crier, beyond the constant, watchful awareness of Brixos. A life where her art could flourish, seen by many. But as she looked around her small workshop, at the familiar tools, the view of the restless sea, the path leading down to the village where Theron would be firing his own pots, and Callisto would be tending the shrine, she knew her answer. "My clay is from this land, Captain," she said. "My inspiration from this sea. My place is here." Ion shrugged, not understanding but respecting her decision. He purchased several of her pieces, promising to speak of the skilled artisan of a crier in his travels. After the ship departed, Theron found Lyra gazing out at the horizon. "You could have gone, child," he said softly. "Seen the world." Lyra picked up a lump of the phosphorescent clay, its faint glow almost invisible in the daylight. "The world is here, Theron, in every handful of earth, in every wave that breaks. Grand deeds are for heroes of legend. Our task is different. It is to build, to understand, to endure. And sometimes," she added, a faint smile touching her lips, "to offer the darkness a new reflection it hasn't considered." She began to work the clay, her hands moving with a practiced, peaceful rhythm. The sea whispered its secrets against the shore, And Lyra, the artisan of Acraya, listened, no longer with fear, but with the quiet confidence of one who had found her own unique way to navigate the currents of a world shaped by gods and mortals alike. Her heroism would never be sung by bards in royal courts, but it was etched into the resilience of her village, into the strange, beautiful art she created, and into the enduring, watchful peace she had helped to forge with the capricious spirit of the deep. The greatest tribute, she had learned, was not always the grandest, but the one offered with the truest understanding, from the very marrow of one's skill and the tempered heart of one's fear. And that, in itself, was a kind of divine artistry. Life in Acraya found a new rhythm, a cadence marked by the tides and the seasons, but underscored by the quiet vigilance Lyra had instilled. The memory of Brixus's demand and Lyra's ingenious response became a foundational story for the village, recounted by elders to wide-eyed children, not as a tale of terror, but as a lesson in courage, creativity, and the importance of understanding the unseen. Lyra's workshop became a de facto community centre, a place where problems were discussed, ideas were shared, and the beautiful, sturdy pottery she crafted became a symbol of Acraya's enduring spirit. Callisto's prophetic gifts also grew, though they remained subtle, often manifesting as intuitive warnings about weather or insights into the hidden needs of the land and sea. She and Lyra often worked together, Callisto providing the enigmatic whispers of the divine, Lyra translating them into practical action or artistic expression. They learned that appeasing the local spirits wasn't about lavish sacrifice, but about mindful interaction, clearing a blocked spring that fed a sacred grove, or leaving offerings of intricately woven seaweed at the silent rocks, acknowledging Brixus's domain without inviting his direct attention. One spring, a prolonged drought threatened Acraya. The streams dwindled, the earth cracked, and the carefully tended crops began to wither. Fear, a familiar phantom, started to creep back into the village. Some whispered that Brixus was angry again, or perhaps some other forgotten deity of the land felt slighted. Theron, older now and frailer, looked to Lyra with worried eyes. "The sea god is quiet," Lyra mused, examining the parched earth. "This feels different. This is a thirst of the land itself." Callisto, after days spent in quiet contemplation at Kimopalea's shrine and by the failing village spring, came to Lyra. "The earth sleeps," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Its green heart is slow. It needs a song, not of the sea, but of the hidden waters, the roots that bind." A song? Lyra was an artisan of clay, not of music. Yet Callisto's words resonated. She thought of the phosphorescent clay, the earth's fire sleeping beneath the waves. Perhaps there was another fire, another hidden energy within the land itself. Her investigation led her not to grand pronouncements, but to the careful observation of nature. She noticed how certain hardy plants clung to life, even in the driest patches, their roots delving deep. She remembered ancient tales of underground rivers, their paths known only to the nymphs of the earth. She began to craft a series of large, hollow ceramic drums, their surfaces incised with patterns of swirling roots and hidden springs, designs inspired by Callisto's visions and her own observations. She used a special blend of local clays, some dark and rich, others pale and sandy, creating a visual tapestry of the earth's layers. When struck, each drum produced a unique resonant tone, some deep and booming like the heartbeat of the earth, others lighter like the trickle of hidden water. When the drums were ready, Lyra, with Theron and Callisto, led the villagers not to the sea, but to the parched fields surrounding Acraya. Under the brassy, unrelenting sun, they arranged the drums in a wide circle. Lyra showed them the rhythms. Slow, deep beats from the larger drums, interspersed with quicker, more intricate patterns from the smaller ones. It was not a melody of celebration, but a sombre, resonant pulse, an invocation to the slumbering spirit of the land. Hesitantly at first, then with growing conviction, the villagers began to play. The sound rolled across the arid landscape, a deep thrumming that seemed to vibrate through the soles of their feet into the cracked earth itself. They drummed as the sun climbed to its zenith, as it began its slow descent, their arms aching, their throats dry, but their rhythm unwavering. Lyra, at the centre, felt a strange connection, not to a capricious deity, but to the very substance of the world beneath her. As dusk settled, casting long shadows, a change began. A faint breeze stirred, the first they had felt in weeks, carrying the scent of distant moisture. Callisto, her eyes wide, pointed to the western sky. A smudge of dark cloud, small but definite, was gathering on the horizon. Hope, fragile but persistent, surged through the exhausted drummers. They continued their rhythmic invocation, their song of the earth, as the clouds slowly, miraculously gathered, thickened, and spread. And then, as night fell, the first drops of rain began to fall, soft at first, then steadier, a blessed, life-giving shower upon the thirsty land of Acraia. The villagers wept and cheered, their faces turned up to the sky. Lyra stood among them, drenched and smiling, the deep resonance of the earth drums still vibrating within her. She had not commanded the rain, nor had she bargained with a god for it. She had, perhaps, simply reminded the land of its own song, its own capacity for renewal, using the tools she knew best, her hands, her skill, her understanding of the elements. The drought broke. Acraia was saved, not by divine intervention in the traditional sense, but by a communal act of faith, artistry, and a deep listening to the needs of their world. Lyra realized then that the shaping of a world view, the core of the ancient myths, was not just about understanding the gods, but about understanding humanity's place within the intricate web of existence, and their own power to nurture and heal, as well as to appease or defy. Her art was not just about creating objects, but about fostering connection to the elements, to the community, and to the quiet, enduring spirit of life itself. The years passed, marked by the turning of seasons and the steady rhythm of life in Acraia. Lyra grew older, her dark hair now streaked with silver, the lines of experience etched around her sea-storm eyes. She remained a central figure in the village, her wisdom and artistry a quiet anchor. Theron had passed peacefully in his sleep, leaving Lyra as the unofficial keeper of Acraia's artistic and spiritual heritage, a role she shared with Callisto, who had blossomed into a serene and insightful woman, her connection to the subtle energies of their world deepening with each year. Brixos remained a distant presence, a power acknowledged but rarely directly engaged. The occasional offering of unique, sea-themed crafts, often designed by Lyra and presented by Callisto at the Silent Rocks during auspicious tides, seemed enough to maintain the delicate peace. Acraia had learned the language of its local deity, a language not of fear and supplication, but of respectful artistic acknowledgement. One day a young woman named Alara arrived in Acraia. She was a storyteller, a wandering rhapsodist, her voice and lyre her only possessions. She had heard tales carried by traders like Iones years before of a remote village that had found a unique way to live with the spirits of the sea, and of a skilled artisan named Lyra. Alara was collecting stories, weaving them into epics she would share in towns and cities across the Greek lands. She stayed in Acraia for many weeks, listening. She listened to the elders recount the terror of Brixos's demand, to the fishermen speak of the sea's moods, to Callisto's soft explanations of the whispers she heard from the elements. Most of all, she listened to Lyra. Lyra did not speak of heroism, but of observation, of understanding materials, of finding the right form, the right reflection. She showed Alara her workshop, the different clays, the tools worn smooth by her hands. She spoke of the phosphorescent clay as if it were a living thing, with its own secrets and desires. Alara was captivated. The stories she usually collected were of mighty warriors, of divine interventions that shook the heavens, of tragic queens and cursed kings. Acraia's story was different. It was quieter, more intimate, yet it held a profound power. It was a story of resilience, of creativity as a shield against chaos, of a community finding its strength not in defying the gods with weapons, but in understanding them with art and intellect. "Your story, Kyria Lyra," Alara said one evening, as they sat by Lyra's cooling kiln, the scent of fired clay mingling with the sea air, "is not like the others I carry. It has no clashing swords, no thunderbolts from Olympus, yet it speaks to a different kind of strength, a strength that endures." Lyra smiled faintly. "The gods of Olympus are far away, Alara. Their dramas are grand, but their feet rarely touch our small shores. Here we live with the earth and the sea, and the spirits that inhabit them. Our lives are a constant negotiation, a search for balance. Before Alara left Acraia, she composed a new song, not an epic of war, but a lyrical ballad. It told of a village threatened by a forgotten sea god, and of an artisan who, with clay and courage, crafted a tribute that spoke not of fear, but of understanding. It sang of the glowing tiles that mirrored the mystery of the deep, of the earth drums that awakened the slumbering land. It was a song of a crier, of Lyra, and of a different kind of heroism. As Elara's voice, accompanied by the sweet notes of her lyre, carried the song into the twilight, Lyra felt a sense of peace. Her story and a crier's would travel, would be heard. Perhaps it would offer a different perspective, a whisper of hope to other small communities living in the shadow of vast, indifferent powers. Perhaps it would remind people that even in a world shaped by capricious gods and inexorable fate, mortal agency, expressed through skill, wisdom, and art, could carve out a space for beauty and survival. The shaping of a worldview, Lyra understood, was an ongoing process, a story continually being retold and reinterpreted. Her life, her art, had become a small but significant verse in that immense, ancient song. And as the last notes of Elara's lyre faded into the sound of the evening waves, Lyra picked up a fresh piece of clay. There were always new forms to find, new stories to shape from the earth, new reflections to offer the ever-watchful deep. The work, like life itself, was never truly done.